Hello, this is Nicholas Junker, and this is my AEP Module 5, Continuous Improvement, My Story. So we have to look at the questions that were discussed in the reading, and the first one was, who are we? Looking at community, staff, and students. Clyde, like most rural communities, there's declining population. We've lost about a third since 1950. We are predominantly white, 97.8%, like a majority of rural communities. This is how our population is trending. We have a fairly low poverty rate, which is below the state of Kansas rate, which is at 12.8%. We are at 8.6%. We have a fairly low economic disadvantaged in our community. We are agriculturally based. All of our industries are based around agriculture, farming, seed, livestock, planting, cultivating. All of those things are important pieces to our economic ability to provide. Looking at our staff, we have 100% licensed teachers. We do have one person who is joining our staff who is unlicensed. As I'm sure that most of you know, that the amount of teachers that are coming out of colleges and universities now is considerably lower, and so we had difficulty filling the position. But the gentleman has 2 bachelor's degrees in both the areas. It will be sufficient to teach. He will be on transition to teach, and he will do well. One of the things about our staff is we are 20% inexperienced, which means we have less than 3 years experience. So 1 in 5 of our teachers have less than 3 years, and this can be good and bad. As I mentioned later, we are trending younger. It's kind of a changing of the guard. The gentleman that I replaced last year has been teaching at Clifton Clyde for 40 years. We had a teacher who was at Clyde that retired at the end of this school year who had been teaching for 36 years. And we have a math teacher that will be retiring next year who taught 38 years. And so it is kind of a changing of the guard. We do have some of that institutional memory, but we are definitely trending younger, which is both good and bad. Looking at our students, we do have 96.3% Caucasian, 35.2% economically disadvantaged, which is a fairly low rate. And as I mentioned before, we have very little diversity. We're a very homogenous community, very homogenous school, which can be a little bit of a difficulty when we're attempting for culturally appropriate lessons and preparing our students for that 21st century world. So how do we do business? We look at perceptions, values and beliefs, and school processes. So looking at the culture and climate of our school, one of the things we focus on, just like the state of Kansas Board of Education, is 21st century preparedness. We're looking at what can we do to make our kids college and career ready so they can be prepared for school or prepared for the workplace. And one of the things that we focus on quite a bit as well is social emotional learning. We understand that students are not only identified by what they do and what they achieve, they're also identified by how they live and how they are engaged in society and how they work with others. And so that social emotional learning is important. Also, one of the things you have to consider with that as well is making sure people know their own mental awareness. We actually had a mental health night that we sponsored for our county, and I think that was something that's very good, especially because we know, as most of you know, that suicide rates, especially for young people, have been steadily climbing over the last 2 decades. And one of the things that's important for our climate is that we involve all of our stakeholders. We find it very important, and we have developed community partnerships with businesses, local employment agencies, everybody in the community, and making sure they come to the school as well, so that way we can build that relationship and that bond for when our students go out into the world. And that's how we build and we consider those strong interpersonal relationships, not just out in the community, but in our school as well. Do our teachers care about our students? Are they engaged? Are they actively participants in each of their students' lives and community? And that's important for us, especially at a small school. Looking at our values and beliefs, it is important. We find that the whole student needs to be educated, not just are their test scores good, or are they good athletes, or are they strong in their clubs, but make sure they work on their social skills, make sure they understand morality and ethics, and that way we can provide active citizens and positive citizens for the 21st century United States and the world. We also have our community contribution. We find very important, and this is something my administrator has also really focused on, is volunteerism, getting out in the community. Every year we have a community-wide or a school-wide where we go to our communities that are located in our county. We go to Clyde and Clifton, and we just work on the town. We pick up trash. We clean gutters, we help out at the library, and that's one of the things that we find is very, very important. Also, how we do business is looking at our school processes. We have a variety of CTE programs. One of the things we're looking at is adding job certifications that students will when they graduate from our school, they'll be able to have. One of the things we're looking at for next year is a pipeline certification. So students will be able to weld on a pipeline, have that certification right away as soon as they're out of school. And also, one of the things I talked about prior was college and career readiness. One of the ways that we do that is we look at our career cruising. We look at what students like, what they're interested in, what are their skills, what are their learning styles, and what kind of those things can kind of push them towards what kind of careers and what kind of colleges, and that's how we help them through that as well. Also, in school projects attempting to improve morale and community, we do class of the year competitions where students have to work together and collaborate. They had the class of the year that won had a pizza party, and something that was a very good experience. I mentioned before community service, and one of the last things our school processes is our project-based learning. We're looking at adding as many project-based learning classes as we can, as we've seen students are more actively engaged when they're able to have a stake in their learning, and that through project-based learning, we're doing those things. So looking at some of the aspects that I focused on in the previous modules is attendance rates. Our attendance rates over the last 3 years have declined, and our scores on the ACT and our performance state assessment data show and indicate that as well. I think the general understanding is if you're not at school, you're not doing a good job learning. And I did a comparison to 2 other schools that are relative in size to ours, and their attendance rates are fairly steady. And looking at their assessment data, it's you can tell the difference. Another thing looking at where we are now is, as I mentioned before, population decline. So we have 4 different counties that we draw students from inside of our district: Clay, Cloud, Republic, and Washington. And as you can see, all of them are declining in population. One of the things that's important about that is we have to definitely look at our school processes if our population is decreasing. How are we going to structure classes? What are we going to do for class schedules? How are we going to look at in terms of athletic classification? How are we going to make sure that we are meeting all the needs of all of our students, even with diminishing resources? One of the things I prefaced before in terms of tying the attendance was ACT data. Going forward, looking here, I shrunk the ratio, looking at our average versus the state average. You can see that besides this last year, 2018, our average scores were lower or considerably lower than the state average. And one of the things that I discussed with my administrator, kind of referencing one of our previous modules, is that our demographics, due to our size, can dramatically shift our performance and assessment data. And that's one of the reasons why I find it difficult, especially in a small school, to make school process decisions based on year-to-year data due to the great degree of variance of our student skills and achievement levels. And so ACT data is definitely an indicator of that. It has been pretty steady for that amount of time, but up until last year, we were considerably higher. 23.8 was the number average for our students last year. And that's just something that we hope continues, but we understand it's probably an aberration due to the differences in that variance I talked about. So looking at why do we exist? This is our USD24 mission statement. The idea is, and I talked about it before, is creating strong citizens to have success in the world, whether that's in their job, in their life, in their community, whatever it is. We want to make them productive members of our society. And I think that's one of the things that's very important to us going forward. So when we have to look at where do we want to be? So we have two sets of goals here. One, data-driven goals. Two, a broad vision and message goals. So we're looking at those three different aspects that I talked about before: attendance rate, population decline, and ACT scores. We have to look at ways to change or alter school processes in an effort to put forth positive change. So when we're looking at attendance rate, we had that slowly declining attendance rate. Our last rate was 93.9%. I would like to see over the next 5 years us to have a 98% attendance rate, because those will definitely increase our performance achievement, our ACT achievement, and overall our school climate. And one of the things we need to look at is how are we going to get people involved? How are we going to get have positive incentives to encourage people to come to school? And that's one of the things that we look at. And I think that's one of those things with our CTE programs, our certification programs, and our project-based learning to get kids more excited about schools. Also looking at our population decline, some of the things the state of Kansas has been doing are some of the things that I have suggested as well. We want to try to just reduce the decline and then try to encourage or increase the ability for people to want to come to our communities. So looking at things that our city or our county could offer, our tax incentives to businesses, we could offer student loan incentives. The state already does some of those things, but as a community or even employers in our community could sponsor people. And then making sure that we have small business loans available, because we know that true drivers of getting people to communities is economic activity. And so if you're going to have people opening small businesses, that will encourage that growth, or that reduce the decline and get our graduates to come back to have jobs here. And our last piece for our data-driven goals is our ACT scores. I would like to see if we could, we did have a growth, like I said, last year, kind of an aberration of the data. An outlier was just 23.8 average. I would like to see us average 21, which is fairly close to the national and the state average over the next 5 years. We do that by having a rigorous curriculum, and we could do it through scores-based remediation. We looked at a piece of data in some of our modules that looked at where students were testing on their MAP testing, on their performance data, and we tied that to how they would do on the ACT. And so that's an area we can look at as well. But it's not just about that performance aspect. If we overall increase our ability to do strong student processes, if our positive perceptions will grow, then our academic scores will grow as well. So looking at our broad vision and message goals, I have kind of a list of 5 here that I find that are the most important pieces to where we want to go in the near future. So first and foremost, I think in our school addresses that, but I think we need to do a little bit better of a job as 21st century preparedness. Especially in a small community, we know that we can sometimes lag behind the times. And that's one of the things we got to do is we got to make sure that we're preparing students for the jobs of today and the jobs that don't even exist yet. Especially with the way that the economy moves and how quickly technology evolves, we've got to give them those skills that they can do, that they can perform any job out there. Another thing is social emotional competency. I mentioned before that the rise in suicide rates, the rise in depression, the rise in anxiety, the rise of all a considerable amount of mental illnesses across broad sections of society as a whole is troubling. And one of the ways that we can combat that as a school is through that social emotional competency. We have those mental health awareness nights. We have those programs that focus on kids doing well, asking for help, what they need to do, what they feel about themselves, how they want to live their lives, and those things, so we can make sure that we have that growth and try to stem those issues. One thing that's important to us, important to me, especially as a government teacher, is active citizen engagement. One of the things I don't think we do great at a school is those things like engaging the community in voting, having teachers and students cultivate relationships so they can engage the rest of the citizens in those debates, those discussions about what's going on in the school, what's going on in the community, what's going on in the world, those types of things. I also mentioned before our lack of diversity, which we're not unlike any other small Kansas rural or anything rural in American towns. We don't have a lot of diversity, and so I think it's important for us to focus on that cultural awareness, that there are different people looking at it from their point of view, and focus on that a little bit going forward. And then the last thing is focused on necessarily is compliance. Part of that is you got to do it. You want to focus on student achievement. You want to focus on perception. You want to focus on how you're growing your students. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to pay the taxes. Sometimes, it's important to make sure that you understand and fit those broad goals for the state as well. That is the end of my video. Thank you.